Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Fractured Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hopping. I am an author, a Cherokee Nation citizen, a former pastor and church planner, and really just going to introduce those new to the podcast. Fractured Faith really is a time where we kind of talk through some of the doctrines and theologies and practices of the church and how the faith is much, much bigger than some of the traditions we grew up in. And so you can shift in your traditions and maybe even your theology a little bit without having to leave behind the way of Jesus, which I think is very crucial. Now, today, I actually want to kind of pivot just a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit. And still, I guess, can be relevant to those who are kind of processing and deconstructing a little bit. But I really want to talk about hatred and defining hatred, because I see that hatred is beginning to get tossed around a lot. We're seeing a lot of hot hate speech and a lot of things bubbling up in the church, outside the church, all around us. And it actually is one of the things that kind of drove me away from some of the parts or certain parts of the American evangelical kind of church complex, because I just saw a lot of hatred there. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about that and helping what the Bible talks about hatred and how we can then look forward to that and changing our own hearts, because it is easy to fall into hatred. It's really easy to do it. Now, I've been sitting on this for a while because it's not an easy topic. It seems like an easy topic, but it really is not that easy, especially in the light of you had the assassination of Melissa Hortman, and then you had the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and you saw the blame game and the hate speeches and the things that came out of that. And if you were saying one thing, you were hatred. If you're saying another thing, that, and you're seeing this really big kind of thing in our churches and in our political sphere of where we have hatred for those who disagree with us, right? It's not enough to just disagree and be able to say that we disagree with that. It is really this almost this vehement hatred that's starting to get in there, and you're starting to see that creep up more. And that shows that language in how you treat those people you disagree with, because a lot of times you're treating them, and the words you're using is belittling them as a human, that there's something, bad about them. There's something evil about them. There's something horrible about them. Not just that they disagree with the way, but they're trying to destroy, so quote, our country, or destroy our churches, or that they are demonic, or they are hatred. All this language is coming in, and it really is around hatred and fear. I would actually say there's fear that's involved in there, fear of change, fear of things being different that's coming in there. And that's why I want to take a moment to kind of sit back and say, hey, how can we look at how can we look at this from what the Bible's saying? And how can we look at it and say, hey, what did Jesus say about hatred and what's going on there? And I think one thing we have to remember is that just because you hold a position, whether that's a political decision, a public policy position, a theological position, or a tradition that you want, those are things that can change, right? It's like I'm a prime example of that. As a follower of Jesus over the years, like I said, I was a pastor. I've written several theology books, so I guess you call me a theologian in some ways. And there are things that I've changed in my thought process, right? I've changed. I went from one point to another point. I've changed some of what my positions were. Even though I stay close to Jesus, I changed the outward looking of that, but I'm still me. And yet in changing the positions, I found myself on the side of being hated by people who used to love me, people I went to church with, people who I used to call pastor, people who I used to call me their pastor, now are saying things that are very hatred, or repeating things that are saying that pitting down people of my camp and places world, right? And when I say, hey, whoa, I go and tell them, like, wait a minute, that's hurtful. They're quick to saying, well, not you. Everybody else in your camp, yeah, but not you, because we know you. And yet that really doesn't help, because if you have hatred in your heart towards people who hold a position, political, religious, sociological, whatever else, then that means you're going to hate me, right? So that is a painful deal. So with that kind of setup, I really kind of let's go into looking at the Bible. So if we open the book of Leviticus, right now, a lot of people we don't like Leviticus, guys, lots of different things in it, but Leviticus actually is a pretty good book because it's really talking about how the people of God can keep themselves in relationship with the creator God, right? So it's not a rule book so that you have to keep it like if you do this you're out of the family. There's an assumption that you are part of the family, but as part of the family there's obligations that you have. So in Leviticus 19 verse 17 and 18, there's this verse says, do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so you do not share in his guilt. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, in that, there's a lot of layers on that one. This is really where Jesus gets, love your neighbor as yourself. And there's a sense that do not hate your brother in your heart. There's a sense that hatred comes out of that heart that comes in there and the seed of it. Now, this verse also talks about rebuking your neighbor and sharing his guilt. Now, I think rebuking your neighbor is different than hatred. If I think right now of Jesus, I see that in the Gospels, he has some really hard-hitting comments towards the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but that really wasn't out of hatred. He was actually calling them back and saying, hey, wait a minute. He's rebuking them and saying that these things may not be the best ways, but he's not belittling them. He's not being able to, I would argue, that he's not belittling them or destroying them. And he's also operating out of sense of this is Joshua going for Jericho, where Joshua comes up to the angel Lord and says, well, whose side do you own? He's like, well, none. I'm not on your side or anybody else. I see Jesus in that same place because he's not on the sides of the Sadducees. He's not on the sides of the Pharisees. He's really on his own side, right? When he's rebuking them. But a lot of time what we see now, we see the hatred that we come in. We see hatred to our brothers and sisters, and we do not love our neighbors as ourselves. In fact, we're afraid of our neighbors, especially if our neighbors are maybe Hispanic or Asian or African, or they maybe Native American, or they're somewhat different than who we are. There's a kind of a hatred because we're afraid that they're going to take our jobs, that they're going to change our culture, that they're going to do something to our family. So that hatred begins to boil in the hearts. And yet Jesus is saying, love your neighbors as yourselves, right? To be able to do it. Say, don't let your heart be fractured in doing it. And that's the understanding. The Hebrew idea of hatred isn't about that emotion. It's not this emotion of, am I mad at Tom right now? There's an orientation. It's I'm going to kick that person out. I'm not going to belong to that person. So that's why when Jesus shows up many years later and you see him on the Sermon on the Mount, and this is Matthew 5, verse 43 to 45, and he says, Jesus goes, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father in heaven. This is astonishing. He doesn't just forbid hatred. He redefines what that maturity and it looks like. He says to be a child of God is to love like God, without category, without exception, without scorekeeping. It is to love your enemies. This is insane in so many ways, which I think is why a lot of people try to redefine what love is, because they want to redefine love in their own deal so they can say, well, I love my enemies, even while they're spouting off hatred marks, or they're passing laws, or they're kicking them out of their churches. And because it's the idea of, I'm going to, hate the sin, love the sin, or love the person, but hate the sin. And there's all these different caveats. We're trying to define who's my neighbor and how do I love my enemies without actually loving them, because they're my enemies. I don't want to do it. But Jesus doesn't give us an out. He doesn't say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you only, if they're such and such, or only if you get something out of it. He says, love your enemies. And this is something I think the early church really did take very, very, very seriously. And you see that actually in the rest of the New Testament. James, chapter 3, verse 5 and 10, talks about, he goes, the tongue is a small fire, and it can set the whole forest ablaze. With it, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. So it's out of that heart that we saw, that heart, that hatred that comes out of the heart, right? And we use our tongues, and it starts this fire and it burns, which is why we have to be so careful about what we say and how to say it, how we say it. Again, this is not saying we can't disagree with people. There's people I disagree with all the time, but I still love those people. I'm not spouting hatred with them. I'm not belittling them. I'm not tearing them down. I'm not using words that are destroying them, right? And that's where hatred is. And so much of our, I would say, even our churches, right? Our churches are got into this almost a fear thing, and it's like we're known for more of what we're against than what we are for, and our tongues begins to set the forest blaze, and we're cursing people who are made in the likeness of God, which is insane to me, because the words of Jesus says, don't. He said, love your enemies, love those who hurt you, bless those who hurt you. Paul, on the same theme in Ephesians, right? Chapter 4:29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building up, that it may give grace to those who hear it. I remember that verse being drilled into me as a child to be able to say in vacation Bible schools or churches or in my own home. He's saying, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. If you don't have something good to say, don't say it at all. Right? But how much are our politicians and people that we follow, our commentators in our podcasts, how many of our churches are sitting there and talking about how we can't let we can't let those people run the government. We can't let those people into the church. We can't let those people into our neighborhood. We can't do that because, they're harmful or they're evil or they're going to destroy something. But these are people made in the image of God. These are people that we should be loving and caring for. James said, those who have mercy, give them mercy. If you don't receive mercy, give mercy, right? Apostle John even goes further. He says, whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God, whom they have not seen. In 1 John 4:20. So there is a powerful, powerful connotation, I think, on our society right now, because we have a lot of people, and I really speak more to our church leaders and our church people than I do those who are not following God. But it's like, how can you claim to love God while hating someone else? Right? There's no caveat there, right? There's no caveat saying, I have to love God, and I can hate those that are different than me and I can still love it, or I can hate those that have different race or ethnicity or different social class. Jesus doesn't pit any, or John, the Holy Spirit, speaking through the Apostle John, doesn't have any caveats there. Brother and sister. Well, brother and sister is not your physical brother and sister. This is talking about, yes, the brothers and sisters in the faith, but also just everybody, right? The brothers and sisters, the God made in the image, especially you kind of compare that to what James said beforehand about we curse people. We were not to curse people who made in like this God. So that's that thing. And again, and you just think about just the struggles you had in the New Testament, of where you had the Hellenistic Jews and the Hellenistic Jews, and then you had the Jewish people of the Dispersia, and they came and they were fighting each other. And that's actually what led to the appointing of Stephen actually as one of the first deacons, because they needed to make sure that the bread would be distributed to everyone correctly, because they were trying to make sure that they actually were treating everybody and loving each other correctly. And again, that's how we see God. So that's how we love God. And then of course, Paul, when he went to the rest of the world, the Gentiles, he's saying, hey, you can come into the body of Christ and you can be part of our family. And these are people that were from all different ethnic groups, all places, including military people who were actually involved in genocide against the Jewish people. Read the first century history and you realize that it was a bloody time. And a lot of the Roman soldiers and such were actually actively engaged in pitting down rebellions and fights against there, into a point that when Jesus probably 5 to 10 years of age, they had about 5,000, I think 2,000 to 5,000 people put on crosses crucified near his hometown. And now that can put a big, point on your life, right? And yet here you have this time of in this place where you have the Roman military coming in, all these different things happening, and Jesus is saying love, and John is saying love, and Paul is saying love, and James is saying love. Don't hate, love, right? Which is love. In fact, it's saying is to love people is even more than just don't hate somebody, right? Because it's actually almost been an active verb in it that we are to love them, to bless them, to pray for them, rather than just holding back on those places. Now, we're going to keep going a little bit deeper on this as we come in, because if you look at the early church, you go past the time of the apostles, and you have Gregory of Nicaea, and he writes that human nature is one and the same in all, and to hate any part of it is to hate the image of God. Or John Christopher, the great preacher of Antioch, who said, he who speaks evil of his brother has slain him with his own tongue, right? So it's like almost deal that to hate somebody is akin to murder. It's like, don't hate, it's a sense that if to lust after somebody is to commit adultery. Well, to hate your brother is to commit murder against that. And that is a pretty huge statement to come in. Origen, that wild and crazy guy of the 3rd century, said, none can truly hate another unless he first forgets who he is. In a sense that hatred really isn't just as something, the mooring failing of, it's actually a kind of amnesia, so to speak, that we are made for love, to be loved, and that when we turn to hate, we have given up part of who we are to be able to hate somebody. Because we have to remember, like we love because we were first loved, right? That we were once on the other side, and we have decided to follow Jesus and move in to follow Jesus, and then we were brought into that family. How much more then are we to love others and to welcome them in, realizing that they're this one prayer, so to speak, away from being in our family, right? To be able to lock arms with them. So how can we hate people of different ethnicity? How can we hate people of a different political party? How can we hate somebody of a different religion? How can we hate somebody of a different even tradition within Christianity? For these, again, are people made in the image of God. It is there that we have to, right? I think we need to really move past the hate speech, the belittling speech. We need to get back to a civil discourse where we can debate the different decisions and the politics and social policies. We should be able to debate this in a civil manner, realizing that I am not hating my sisters or my brothers or the different people who are different than me, but I might have a different opinion, and I should listen to their opinions and listen to what they're saying and really say that maybe they have something I could learn from, right? It wasn't that long ago. I remember even, in the 80s and stuff where there was a civility to our politics. And yet the last 20 years, well, last 10 years right now, especially the rise of MAGA world, and I'll call that out, there's been just a rise of hatred coming in. But that hatred didn't just pop up anywhere. I would say it actually goes back to the church, because I remember when I was pastoring, this might be a little controversial, but when I was pastoring in the mid 2000s, because I was basically associate pastor, senior pastor from 2000 and about 2007, all the way to about 2021. So the pretty good jump there, and then different forms and fashions in that way. But there was the great replacement theories, and then there was the emerging church, and people there's a lot of pastors and people in Christianity speaking against them, hatred against them. We had people bombing abortion clinics because we hated them, right? Instead of realizing that the hurt and the pain that was going through those moms and those people, then they needed us. Instead, we were letting our hatred come out, and we were speaking ill of these people. And we really need to get our hand on this. We really bring it back and get this civility, this civility back, and say, you know what? We do not need to be speaking and belittling each other, even with our disagreements. We can disagree, but we can still do so in love. I go back to Jesus, right? Luke 6:45. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speak. If we want to heal our words, we must heal our hearts. And that healing must come into it and be a let us come through the love of God. Colossians 4:6, let your speech be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, right? Let that be come in. Again, this is what I'm saying. You don't have to be, love and grace doesn't always be having to be nice. Sometimes you do got to be truthful, but you can be truthful without belittling somebody. You can disagree without hating somebody. And so again, that's where I really want to call us back. And that's really where I want to talk this message about. Is I think we really need to come back to realizing that hatred has no place in the way of Jesus. Okay? Hatred has no place in the way of Jesus. To be a follower of Jesus is to fight against the hatred in of our own hearts. It is to be almost a follower of Jesus is to fight against the fear that may come in. This is what I say: the perfect love casts out all fear. Cast all fear because I know who loves me. I know who's with me. And that does not mean that no pain may not come. If I go back to the early church and I think through what happened, I think of Paul and I think of James and I think of Jesus himself, right, who were killed and hurt and beat up because they dared to love and they dared to lead forth with grace and mercy. It may cause problems in that nature, right? It may hurt. But again, if we are to be followers of Jesus, this is what I keep come back to, and this is not me trying to be, blinded here or trying to actually give you some kind of a nice, cozy thing. It's again, I look at the model of Jesus here, but if we are to be followers of Jesus, then we need to follow what he said to do, which is love and bless people, to go forth, to be careful of what we say in our speech, because that's what he said to do. And then we need to be able to walk that out. So if we do get persecution, because we will know persecution will come, but the persecution should be coming because of our love, not because of our hatred. If you're getting persecuted, I'll go here. This is off my notes a little bit, but if you're spouting hate, if you're talking about hate and you're pitting down people, and then people are getting upset at you, that's not persecution. That's hate coming back. Hate begets hate. Hate begets hate. Fear begets fear. Pain begets pain. The way you get out of hate is by love and mercy and grace. That's how you get out of fear, is by love, right? So if you're speaking love and you're saying, whoa, wait a minute, this is people here, this is love, and this is what grace and what mercy and what the way of Jesus is. Now, if you get persecuted from that, I think that's more in line with what God's saying. But if you're spouting out hate, you're going to expect you to hate back, okay? Like begets like in so many ways. So we got to get out of this persecution complex that we also have. I actually talk a little bit about that in my book, The Mystery, The Way, and the Journey, another topic, but coming in and realizing that we in the Western world, in America, really don't know what persecution really is, quite frankly. But we do need to realize that we need to be speaking in love and grace and mercy. And again, we need to put a cap on the hate and the fear speech and the belittling speech. And we need to do that in our churches, in our politics, in our day-to-day life, in our families. We need to be doing that in all areas of life. Again, I go back to Luke, right? Luke 6:45, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if you are speaking hatred and fear, then that's out of the abundance of the heart. The abundance of the heart should be bubbling up grace and love and gentleness and kindness and places coming in there. Go back to the fruits of the Spirit of Paul. So that is really what I want to kind of talk to a little bit here about healing and seeing that and really coming back to understanding what is hatred. So that when we see people spouting hatred, we can say, hey, time out. And we also be able to watch your own voice and our own words to be able to say, how can I disagree in love? How can I disagree and yet treat that person who I disagree with grace and mercy, knowing that they are a person made in the image of God, that Jesus Christ himself, the creator of heavens and earth, actually died for that person with whom I disagreed, right? This just as much as Jesus Christ died for me, he died for that person with whom I disagreed with. And that we need to be able to treat that person with that respect and with the grace and the mercy and the love that Jesus treated us with. So that is something for us to chew on today. So again, thank you guys so much for this episode of Fractured Faith. Make sure you like and subscribe so you can make sure you get up with it, because I know I've been kind of falling behind on my schedule, but I'm on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Thank you guys so much. Until next time. Take care, guys. God bless. Bye.